Mikhail Gorbachev. Life history of the last Soviet leader. Introduction. Mikhail Sergeyevich Gorbachev, 1931-2022, stands as one of the most consequential leaders of the 20th century. He led the Soviet Union during a period of historic change, overseeing the end of the Cold War, introducing sweeping reforms known as Perestroika, restructuring, and Glasnost, openness, and ultimately presiding over the dissolution of the Soviet Empire. Gorbachev is remembered as both a visionary reformer and a controversial figure whose actions brought both hope and upheaval. Early life and education, 1931-1955. Mikhail Gorbachev was born on March 2, 1931, in the village of Privolnoye, in the Stavropol region of the Russian SFSR. His family were collective farmers, and his early life was shaped by the harsh conditions of Stalinist rural Russia. His father, Sergei Gorbachev, was a combine harvester operator and a veteran of World War II. His mother, Maria Gopkalo, came from a Ukrainian peasant family. Gorbachev's childhood was marked by poverty, famine, and political repression. His maternal grandfather was arrested during the Stalinist purges. Despite the harsh conditions, Gorbachev was a bright student and active in Komsomol, the Communist Youth League. His exposure to Soviet ideology and admiration for Lenin would shape his early beliefs. Moscow State University, in 1950, Gorbachev won a place at the prestigious Moscow State University, where he studied law. There, he met his future wife, Raisa Titarenko, a philosophy student and fellow intellectual. This period was formative. Gorbachev gained exposure to Marxist-Leninist thought, but also to European literature and political philosophy, which planted the seeds of critical thinking. He graduated in 1955, becoming a committed Communist Party member with a legal degree. Early political career, 1955-1978. Returning to Stavropol after graduation, Gorbachev joined the local Communist Party apparatus, rising rapidly. He began as a Komsomol organizer and worked his way up through the agricultural committees and regional party organizations. His early political work focused on agricultural reform, an area critical to Soviet economic planning. He was known for his competence, energy, and innovation, which caught the attention of senior officials. In 1961, he attended the 22nd Communist Party Congress, where Khrushchev denounced Stalin. Gorbachev supported de-Stalinization and was seen as a loyal but reform-minded party member. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, Gorbachev had become first secretary of the Stavropol Regional Committee, a powerful post that brought him into contact with national leaders including Yuri Andropov, then head of the KGB. Rise to power in the Kremlin, 1978-1985. In 1978, Gorbachev moved to Moscow as a member of the Central Committee. A year later, he was appointed Secretary of Agriculture, a key portfolio in the Brezhnev era. Gorbachev's national profile rose steadily during the early 1980s, especially after the deaths of successive Soviet leaders, Brezhnev, 1982, Andropov, 1984, and Chernenko, 1985. Gorbachev, younger and more energetic than other Politburo members, began to emerge as a modernizing candidate. Following Chernenko's death in March 1985, Gorbachev was elected General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, CPSU, the highest position in the USSR at the age of 54, the youngest leader in decades. Reforms, Perestroika and Glasnost, 1985-1991. Goals. Gorbachev believed that the Soviet system was inefficient, corrupt, and economically stagnant. His aim was to reform socialism, not destroy it. He introduced two key policies: Perestroika, restructuring, economic and political reforms to revitalize the Soviet system; Glasnost, openness, increased transparency in government and freedom of expression. Economic reforms. Gorbachev attempted to modernize the Soviet economy by decentralizing decision-making, allowing limited private enterprise, encouraging foreign investment, reducing central planning. However, these reforms were poorly implemented and faced resistance from conservative elements. Productivity declined, shortages increased, and inflation rose. The reforms destabilized the system faster than they improved it. Glasnost and free speech Glasnost unleashed wave of criticism against the Communist Party. Previously banned books and films were released. Intellectuals began to question Soviet history and ideology. The media became freer. Censorship was reduced. Public debate erupted about Stalin's crimes, the war in Afghanistan, and ethnic grievances. This openness empowered nationalist movements and reformers, but it also weakened the party's grip on power. Foreign policy and the end of the Cold War. Gorbachev's greatest international legacy lies in his foreign policy of détente and the peaceful end of the Cold War. Key achievements: relations with the West. Built strong personal relationships with Western leaders including Ronald Reagan, George H. Bush, and Margaret Thatcher. Signed INF Treaty, 1987, eliminating intermediate-range nuclear missiles. Agreed to deep arms reductions and strategic stability. Withdrawal from Afghanistan. Ended the disastrous Soviet war in Afghanistan, 1979-1989. Admitted the war was a mistake, a rare move for a Soviet leader, Eastern Europe, and the fall of the Berlin Wall. Announced the Sinatra Doctrine, 1989. Warsaw Pact nations could choose their own paths. Did not intervene militarily when Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and East Germany began to liberalize. In November 1989, the Berlin Wall fell, symbolizing the end of the Cold War. Gorbachev allowed peaceful revolutions in Eastern Europe, a decision that gained him immense praise in the West but resentment at home. Domestic crisis and the fall of the USSR. Economic collapse. By the late 1980s, the Soviet economy was in free fall. Production plummeted, food and basic goods were in short supply, inflation surged. The state was losing control of the economy and political order. Rise of nationalism, Glasnost, and decentralization encouraged republics like Lithuania, Ukraine, and Georgia to seek independence. 1991 elections. Gorbachev created the position of President of the USSR, to which he was elected in 1990. However, real political power was shifting to reformers like Boris Yeltsin, who became President of the Russian Republic in 1991. The August coup. 1991. In August 1991, hardline communists launched a coup against Gorbachev while he was on vacation in Crimea. The coup failed due to public resistance and Yeltsin's leadership. Gorbachev returned to Moscow, but his authority was shattered. The end of the USSR following the coup. Republics declared independence. The CPSU was banned. On December 25, 1991, Gorbachev resigned as president. The Soviet Union ceased to exist. Post-Soviet life, 1992-2022. After leaving office, Gorbachev became an international figure advocating for peace, democracy, and disarmament. Writing and speaking. Published memoirs and books on reform and international relations. Frequently toured Europe and the U.S., founded the Gorbachev Foundation to promote social and political reform attempt. At political comeback in 1996, Gorbachev ran for president of Russia, but won less than 1% of the vote, signaling his unpopularity at home despite global acclaim. Global recognition, 1990. Nobel Peace Prize. Honorary degrees and awards worldwide. Praised for helping end the Cold War without bloodshed. Death and legacy. Mikhail Gorbachev died on August 30, 2022 in Moscow at the age of 91 after a long illness. His death sparked international tributes, with world leaders recognizing his historic role in transforming global politics. Legacy: a leader between worlds. Global achievements: ended the Cold War. Avoided nuclear conflict. Introduced democratic reforms, allowed freedom of speech and press. Enabled independence of Eastern Europe. Domestic criticism. Oversaw economic collapse. Failed to manage reform effectively. Presided over the breakup of the USSR. Lost the support of both conservatives and radicals. Historical view: Gorbachev is remembered as a tragic reformer who tried to save socialism by transforming it, a visionary democrat in an authoritarian, System A global statesman but a domestically isolated leader. Summary timeline, year event 1931. Born in Privolnoye 1955, graduated from Moscow State University, 1978, joined the CPSU Central Committee. 85, became General Secretary of the CPSU 1987, signed INF Treaty with the U.S. 1989, Berlin Wall falls 1990. Becomes President of the USSR on 1991, survives coup. Resigns in December 1996, runs for Russian presidency, unsuccessfully, 2022. Dies in Moscow at age 91. Conclusion: Mikhail Gorbachev remains one of the most complex and misunderstood leaders of modern times. He sought to reconcile socialist ideals with democratic freedoms, but his reforms spiraled beyond his control. While he was rejected by many of his own people, he is celebrated globally for ending the Cold War, opening the Soviet Union, and promoting human rights and peace.